The galaxy had always been a place of endless possibilities, filled with civilizations far older and wiser than humanity. Humans, despite being young and unpredictable, had always reached beyond their own planet with curiosity and ambition. They had learned to reach the stars, to touch distant worlds, and to explore regions that others had long thought too dangerous or unworthy of attention. But with that curiosity came recklessness. The Galactic Council, a powerful union of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, had watched humans with both fascination and fear. Every time humanity made a bold move, whether it was sending untested probes into foreign star systems or experimenting with technologies no one else dared to touch, the Council would issue warnings. Yet humans, confident in their creativity and resilience, often ignored these cautions, believing that they could handle whatever challenges came their way. For decades, humans had been pushing boundaries. They had begun exploring sectors of space that were officially marked as restricted, and sometimes, without intending to, they had disrupted delicate negotiations or operations between other civilizations. The Council saw this as dangerous, not only because humans were young and unpredictable, but also because their rapid technological growth posed a threat to the careful balance of power that had been maintained for centuries. Other species had learned the rules of space diplomacy, but humans seemed to follow only their own logic. They were ambitious, daring, and stubborn, a combination that made them both fascinating and frightening to the Council. The situation reached a breaking point during the incident known as the Orion Rift conflict. A human scientific expedition had entered a region claimed by multiple Council species. Their ships, armed with experimental energy shields and propulsion systems, accidentally triggered a defense network designed to protect the area. What started as a minor mistake quickly escalated into a standoff. Humans, refusing to back down, managed to escape without casualties, but the demonstration of their abilities shook the Council to its core. How could such a young species, barely a century into interstellar exploration, survive an encounter that even seasoned civilizations struggled with? Worse, how could they do it with confidence and without apparent fear of retaliation? The Council convened an emergency session to decide humanity's fate. The representatives, beings of unimaginable intellect and power, debated fiercely. Some argued that humans should be welcomed, guided, and taught the ways of galactic order. Others insisted that humans were too dangerous, too unpredictable, and that their presence would eventually lead to catastrophic conflicts. Voices clashed over moral responsibility, security, and the potential cost of inaction. But despite the arguments for patience and mentorship, a clear majority leaned toward one conclusion: humanity could no longer remain within the Council's reach. They were too dangerous, too uncontrollable, and their potential to upset the delicate order of the galaxy outweighed any benefit of continued inclusion. The decision, though carefully debated, was unanimous. Humanity would be banished. The declaration was simple in words, but immense in consequence. All communication between humans and the Council would cease. All trade, all alliances, and all official interactions would be severed. Human explorers would be forbidden from entering Council space, and any attempt to bypass this decree would be met with immediate force. The Council made it clear that this was not a punishment born of malice, but a measure taken for the safety of the galaxy. Humanity, as far as the Council was concerned, had become a species too unpredictable to be trusted. When the message finally reached Earth, the reaction was a mix of disbelief, anger, and fear. For humans who had long dreamed of becoming part of the galaxy, the words were shocking. They felt as if the door to the universe had slammed shut in their faces. Entire populations struggled to comprehend what had just happened. News channels and communication networks buzzed with speculation. Scientists debated the reasoning behind the Council's decision. Diplomats scrambled to understand any possible negotiation strategies. and ordinary citizens worried about the implications for humanity's future. To many, it felt as though humanity had been cast aside, punished for reaching too far, too fast. Yet amid the fear and anger, there were voices that saw opportunity. Humans, by nature, were resilient and resourceful. Some argued that this forced isolation could be a chance to focus inward, to strengthen humanity's capabilities without outside interference. If they could survive this banishment, perhaps they could emerge stronger, more united, and more prepared for the challenges the galaxy might eventually throw at them. In homes, schools, research centers, and government offices, people began to discuss how humanity could not only survive, but thrive. Even when cut off from the rest of the stars, the first challenge was the sudden cessation of trade and communication with the galaxy. Human colonies on nearby planets, reliant on technology and supplies from the wider galaxy, suddenly found themselves isolated. Supply chains collapsed, and local governments had to scramble to find alternatives. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to adapt technology for self-sufficiency. The banishment forced humanity to rely entirely on their own ingenuity. This was no easy task. Energy systems, water purification, and food production, all previously supported by galactic trade, now had to be reinvented with only Earth's resources. The pressure was immense, and failures were frequent. But every mistake taught humans valuable lessons about adaptability and problem-solving. Lessons that would later become the foundation for their resilience. Socially and culturally, humanity faced a different set of challenges. The banishment was not just a scientific or technological problem. It was a psychological one. People had to come to terms with the idea that the galaxy, vast and wondrous as it was, had turned away from them. There were those who fell into despair, feeling abandoned and powerless. But others found motivation in defiance. They began to see the banishment as a challenge rather than a defeat, a test of human spirit and creativity. Communities organized themselves around common goals, sharing knowledge and resources. The sense of collective purpose strengthened humanity's resolve in ways that peaceful cooperation with the galaxy never had. Governments and military organizations took the banishment seriously, knowing that humanity's survival depended on preparation and adaptation. They invested in research that had been previously neglected, focusing on energy generation, space travel, defense strategies, and sustainable infrastructure. Universities became hubs of innovation, and young minds were encouraged to think in ways that transcended previous limitations. For the first time in human history, the entire species was united by a shared goal: survival, growth, and mastery of their own destiny. Independent of the galaxy's oversight, even in the face of this adversity, humans retained their curiosity. Scientific exploration did not stop. It merely shifted focus. Instead of looking outward to distant civilizations, humans turned their gaze inward, exploring the untapped potential of their planet, their solar system, and even their own biology and consciousness. Experiments once considered too risky or unconventional now received attention, funded by governments, private organizations, and independent visionaries alike. It was a golden era of human creativity born from necessity, a time when limitations became opportunities, and challenges became stepping stones. Despite the isolation, humans did not entirely lose hope of the galaxy. While they accepted the reality of banishment, they quietly prepared for a future where humanity might return not as supplicants, but as equals. Hidden laboratories, secret shipyards, and experimental colonies were developed with long-term goals in mind. Every breakthrough, every innovation, was a step toward the day when humans would no longer be dismissed, when they would show the galaxy that banishment had not weakened them, but strengthened them. The seeds of a future that the Council could not yet imagine were being planted in the hearts and minds of ordinary humans. From scientists and engineers to farmers and students. In retrospect, the banishment though devastating at first, became a defining moment for humanity. It forced the species to confront its weaknesses and limitations while simultaneously unlocking potentials previously unimagined. It created unity through adversity, sparked creativity through necessity, and gave humans a purpose that extended far beyond survival. While the galaxy may have seen humanity's exile as a final verdict, humans began to view it as the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would grow stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever before. By the time decades had passed, humanity was no longer the same species that the Galactic Council had once observed with skepticism and fear. The Banishment had shaped them, refined them, and prepared them for a future that would eventually challenge the Council's assumptions. And in quiet corners of laboratories, spaceports, and observatories, humans began to dream once more not of permission to join the galaxy, but of the day when they would return on their own terms, confident in their power, ingenuity, and unyielding spirit. After the banishment by the Galactic Council, humanity faced a reality that no one could have fully prepared for. Cut off from the rest of the galaxy, humans had to survive entirely on their own. Trade routes were closed, communication channels were blocked, and any hope of support from other civilizations vanished overnight. For a species that had begun reaching the stars, this isolation was like being thrown into a vast ocean with no ships, no maps, and no guidance. At first, the impact was devastating. Supply chains collapsed, interstellar colonies became disconnected, and the world's population faced the harsh truth. Humanity could no longer rely on anyone but itself. The early years of isolation were chaotic. Nations scrambled to adapt, and conflicts arose as resources became scarce. Humans had to rethink everything from energy generation to food production. Many technologies previously taken for granted were suddenly at risk. Satellites, fuel systems, and even communication networks depended on parts or knowledge that were now unreachable. Engineers and scientists had to invent alternatives, often working with materials that were considered outdated or primitive by galactic standards. Mistakes were frequent, and some failures were costly, but each setback taught humans valuable lessons about resilience and adaptability. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Necessity was shaping humans into problem solvers on a scale never seen before. Communities came together in ways that were remarkable. Isolation forced humans to cooperate across national and cultural boundaries. Scientists from different countries collaborated in virtual labs, sharing discoveries and techniques. Farmers experimented with new agricultural methods to produce more food with less water and space. Cities reorganized themselves to maximize efficiency and sustainability. This was not a top-down mandate. It was organic, a response driven by survival. People realized that if humanity wanted to endure, every individual's contribution mattered. Even ordinary citizens, those who had never imagined themselves as innovators, found ways to help recycling materials, conserving energy, teaching others new skills, or volunteering in research programs. Technology, ironically, advanced faster in some areas because of the banishment. Freed from the constraints of galactic oversight, humans began experimenting with ideas that had once been considered too dangerous or impractical. Energy systems were redesigned to be completely self-sufficient. Cities became almost entirely autonomous, generating their own power, recycling water, and producing food locally. Medical science advanced rapidly as humans tackled problems without access to advanced alien treatments. Genetic research, robotics, and artificial intelligence all flourished under the pressure to innovate. Isolation had forced humans to become not just survivors, but creators of entirely new solutions. The psychological impact of isolation was significant too. Being cut off from the galaxy initially created fear, anxiety, and a sense of helplessness. People mourned the loss of contact with civilizations they had admired and envied. They had once dreamed of exploring distant worlds and meeting other intelligent species. But now those dreams seemed impossible. Yet, as humans adapted, a new mindset began to emerge. Isolation became a catalyst for reflection and growth. People started to understand their own potential, realizing that humanity did not need approval or support from the galaxy to be remarkable. This mental shift was subtle but powerful. It transformed despair into determination, frustration into creativity, and uncertainty into vision. Even the military and space agencies adapted to this new reality. Without access to galactic intelligence networks or advanced alien technology, humans had to rethink defense and exploration strategies. They began developing ships capable of long-duration missions, able to operate with minimal external support. Weapon systems were designed not for offense against other civilizations, but for survival against natural and technological threats. Training programs were intensified to prepare crews for the most extreme conditions. Humans learned to survive and operate in isolation, using ingenuity and improvisation to turn challenges into advantages. Over time, this preparation became not only practical, but also a source of pride, a symbol of human resilience in the face of adversity. Human culture evolved alongside technology and strategy. Art, literature, and music reflected both the struggle and the hope of a species learning to thrive alone. Stories were told of courage, ingenuity, and determination, tales of communities coming together, of inventions that saved lives, of ordinary people stepping into extraordinary roles. These stories inspired new generations, reminding them that humans were capable of greatness, even without recognition from the galaxy. Education systems adapted to teach not just knowledge, but creativity, problem-solving, and cooperation. Every lesson, every curriculum, emphasized adaptability and resourcefulness skills that were no longer optional but essential. Economically, humanity had to reinvent itself. With no trade from outside civilizations, every nation relied on local production. Industries shifted to focus on sustainability and resilience. Renewable energy became the norm rather than the exception, and new manufacturing methods allowed humans to build technology from scratch, using resources available on Earth and nearby planets. Space exploration became more strategic, aimed at self-sufficiency rather than ambition. Humans mined asteroids, developed orbital farms, and built autonomous stations that could operate independently. Each innovation reinforced the understanding that survival depended on human skill and collaboration, not outside approval. Socially, the isolation also created a stronger sense of unity. People realized that no one nation or group could face the future alone. Cooperation across borders became a necessity, and slowly, humanity began to think of itself as one species rather than separate nations. Conflicts did not disappear entirely, but priorities shifted. Survival, innovation, and the well-being of communities took precedence over political disputes. Humans learned to value knowledge over ego, results over recognition, and collaboration over competition. This cultural evolution, born from necessity, would later prove to be a crucial strength in humanity's eventual return to the galaxy. Children born during this period grew up with a worldview very different from previous generations. They knew of the Galactic Council only as a distant authority that had once banished their species. For them, the stars were not a realm of conquest or politics, but a challenge to be understood and mastered on humanity's terms. Their education emphasized resilience, creativity, and exploration within constraints. They learned the importance of thinking critically, experimenting boldly, and working together. Unlike earlier generations, who had dreamed of seeking approval from the galaxy, these children dreamed of independence and strength. They were taught to take pride in their species, in their ability to thrive even when cut off from the rest of the universe. Meanwhile, humans continued to observe the galaxy, even from afar. Long-range scanners and observation posts allowed them to monitor galactic events without being noticed. They learned about the rise and fall of civilizations, technological breakthroughs, and political conflicts, all information they absorbed to prepare for the future. Humans did not act aggressively. They did not interfere. Instead, they quietly gathered knowledge, understanding that the galaxy's mistakes and successes could inform their own growth. This period of quiet observation, combined with intense internal development, laid the groundwork for a species that would one day re-emerge not as novices, but as equals. By the end of the first decades of isolation, humanity had transformed. They were no longer just a young, reckless species. They had become disciplined, innovative, and united. Their cities were efficient and self-sufficient, their technology advanced, and their culture resilient. They had learned to survive and thrive under pressure, adapting to limitations and turning challenges into opportunities. While the galaxy may have believed that humans would falter, humanity had grown stronger in ways that the Council could not have anticipated. The banishment, once seen as a curse, had become a catalyst for growth. In quiet laboratories, bustling factories, and remote observation stations, humans dreamed of the future. They knew that one day they might return to the galaxy not as petitioners, but as equals. They imagined a future where their ingenuity, resilience, and courage would command respect. They prepared for a day when humanity's hard-earned independence and strength would allow them to engage with the galaxy on their own terms. Every experiment, every innovation, every lesson learned from decades of isolation became a step toward that future. Humans understood that the road ahead would be long and challenging, but they also knew that they were ready. The story of humanity's rise in isolation is a story of persistence, ingenuity, and unyielding spirit. The Galactic Council may have intended banishment to weaken humanity, but it had done the opposite. In isolation, humans became stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. They had learned to survive without assistance, to innovate without guidance, and to grow in ways the galaxy could not yet comprehend. The seeds of a future that would surprise the universe were being sown, quietly, methodically, and with purpose. And as humanity continued to evolve in the shadows of the galaxy, they prepared for the day when their independence would transform. After decades of isolation, humanity had changed in ways the Galactic Council could never have imagined. They were no longer a reckless, unpredictable species. They had become disciplined, innovative, and united. Yet, humans did not forget the galaxy that had cast them out. Far from it. While they had learned to survive and thrive in isolation, a quiet, determined ambition grew within them, the desire not just to return, but to be ready when the time came. And so, the seeds of the Hidden Fleet were planted, a project so vast and secretive that only a select few knew its true scope. The first step was understanding what the fleet would need to accomplish. Humans knew they could not simply rely on brute force. They had no allies, no support from other civilizations, and the galaxy had powerful defenses that could detect even minor intrusions. The fleet had to be built for resilience, speed, and adaptability. Engineers and scientists began designing ships capable of surviving extreme conditions, navigating vast distances without outside assistance, and operating with minimal maintenance. These ships would use advanced propulsion systems, energy sources that humans had developed in isolation, and shielding technology far beyond anything the galaxy had seen. Every aspect of the fleet was carefully planned, tested, and improved in secrecy. Building the fleet required unprecedented coordination. Resources had to be carefully allocated. Humans mined asteroids for rare metals, refined materials in hidden orbital stations, and manufactured components in secret facilities. Entire cities became hubs of production and innovation, working quietly to support the project. Ordinary citizens contributed in ways that were both practical and profound. Farmers experimented with new ways to produce fuel and energy. Engineers designed new systems for long-term space habitation, and educators trained a new generation of scientists, pilots, and tacticians. Even those who had no direct contact with the fleet felt its presence in their daily lives, knowing that their work, however small, was part of something greater, that the ships themselves were marvels of human ingenuity. Each one was designed with multiple purposes in mind. Some were fast scouts, capable of long-range exploration and reconnaissance. Others were massive carriers, holding thousands of crew members and supplies for years-long missions. Weapon systems were not simply for attack. They were designed to protect, defend, and deter any threat that might appear. Artificial intelligence systems were integrated into every ship, able to make decisions independently if humans were unavailable or communication was interrupted. Humans had learned the importance of redundancy, of creating systems that could survive failure, and this principle was applied to every vessel. Training for the fleet was just as important as building the ships. A human could not simply pilot one of these advanced vessels without understanding the full scope of its capabilities. Crews were trained in strategy, engineering, diplomacy, and survival. Simulations were run for decades, testing every scenario imaginable, from extreme cosmic storms to encounters with unknown civilizations. Humans learned to think like the galaxy's most advanced species, anticipating threats, adapting strategies, and preparing for situations that had never been encountered before. The training was intense, demanding, and often exhausting, but it forged a generation of humans who were ready for anything. Secrecy was vital. The Galactic Council still believed humans were isolated and struggling. The hidden fleet could not be discovered before it was ready. Communication about the project was highly compartmentalized. Only those who needed to know were informed, and even within this inner circle, information was shared on a strict need-to-know basis. People working in shipyards often did not know the full purpose of their work, only their immediate tasks. Scientists developing propulsion systems might never see a completed ship, while crews trained for years were unaware of the full fleet size. This careful structure ensured that the fleet could grow undetected, and it also reinforced discipline and focus among humans, who had become masters of patience and precision. The fleet was also designed to be adaptable. Humans knew that the galaxy was constantly changing, that alliances shifted and technologies evolved. Each ship was modular, able to be upgraded or repurposed as needed. Energy systems could be modified to use new power sources. Weapon systems could be reprogrammed for unforeseen threats, and even the artificial intelligence could learn from experience, evolving over time. Humans were no longer relying on raw power alone. They were creating a fleet that could think, learn, and adapt. Just like the people who built it. Beyond the technology and training, the hidden fleet had another purpose: inspiration. Humans needed a reason to endure, a goal that was tangible yet extraordinary. The fleet became a symbol of hope, a secret promise to every person living under the weight of isolation. It reminded them that humanity was capable of more than survival, that they could rise, not just to meet the galaxy, but to impress it, challenge it, and earn their place among the stars once again. Teachers spoke of it in stories, scientists hinted at it in lectures, and children grew up dreaming of the day they might see it for themselves. The fleet was more than metal and circuits. It was humanity's shared dream given form. Years turned into decades, and the fleet grew quietly but steadily. Hidden stations in orbit and underground shipyards produced vessels that were increasingly advanced. Artificial intelligence systems became more sophisticated, able to anticipate threats and assist humans in ways that were previously unimaginable. Energy systems became nearly self-sufficient, capable of supporting years-long missions without external supplies. Humans had achieved something extraordinary, They had taken their forced isolation and turned it into an opportunity to become stronger, smarter, and more capable than anyone had expected. The fleet also fostered a sense of unity and purpose across humanity. People worked together not because they were forced to, but because they believed in the vision. Generations grew up with the knowledge that their work, no matter how small, contributed to a larger goal. This unity extended beyond the fleet itself. Scientists collaborated with engineers, educators trained pilots, and communities supported resource-gathering missions. Humanity was learning a lesson that the Council had never fully understood. Isolation could create strength, and adversity could foster cooperation on a scale previously thought impossible. Even as the fleet neared completion, humans remained patient. They knew that showing it too soon would invite unnecessary conflict or reveal secrets prematurely. The fleet was not intended for revenge. It was designed to be a tool of empowerment, a way to ensure that when humans returned to the galaxy, they would do so on their own terms. Every ship, every crew member, every technological breakthrough was part of a long-term vision. Humans had learned the value of timing, strategy, and careful preparation, a stark contrast to the impulsive species that the Council had once dismissed. By the time the first vessels were fully operational, humans had become a species transformed. The hidden fleet was not just a collection of ships. It was a manifestation of everything humanity had become in isolation: resilient, creative, disciplined, and united. Each vessel represented decades of research, innovation, and determination. Every crew member embodied the spirit of a people who had survived banishment, adapted to extreme circumstances, and refused to be defined by the judgment of others. Yet, for all its power and sophistication, the fleet was only part of the story. Humans had also been developing strategies, gathering knowledge about the galaxy, and learning how to navigate the political, scientific, and military landscapes they would one day encounter. The hidden fleet was their bridge back to the stars, but it was also a symbol of everything humans had achieved in exile. It was a reminder that even when the universe seemed indifferent or hostile, determination, ingenuity, and cooperation could create extraordinary results. And so, as the decades passed, humans waited patiently. The fleet grew in secret, technology advanced, crews trained tirelessly, and society continued to innovate. The seeds of a future that the Galactic Council could not yet imagine were taking root, hidden from view, but thriving in every laboratory, shipyard, and observatory. Humanity was no longer just a species struggling to survive. It was a species preparing to return to the galaxy stronger, wiser, and more capable than anyone could have predicted. This was the age of preparation, the era when humans quietly mastered themselves, their technology, and their future. The hidden fleet was the ultimate expression of that mastery, a fleet born of isolation, nurtured by creativity, and guided by a vision of a future where humanity would reclaim its place among the stars. And though the galaxy still believed humans were weak, lost, or forgotten, the truth was far more powerful. Humanity was waiting, ready, and growing stronger every day. After decades of preparation, humans were finally ready to reappear in the galaxy, not as novices, but as a species transformed by isolation, ingenuity, and determination. For centuries, the Galactic Council had assumed that humanity would struggle, weaken, or even fade into obscurity. They watched from afar, confident that the young species would never regain the strength to challenge the established order. But the first signs of humanity's return arrived quietly, almost unnoticeably, at the edge of Council space. A single scout vessel, advanced beyond anything known to the galaxy, appeared silently. It moved with precision and purpose, its systems operating flawlessly despite decades of isolation. The initial reaction among Council members was disbelief. Observatories detected the ship, but its capabilities defied explanation. Its shields were unlike anything the Council had recorded, able to withstand energy pulses that would have destroyed other vessels. Its propulsion systems allowed it to travel vast distances with remarkable speed and efficiency. Most surprisingly, the ship seemed to operate without any external support, maintaining perfect stability, even in regions of space previously considered dangerous or uninhabitable. For the first time in generations, the Council faced a species that had not only survived banishment, but had grown far stronger in the process. The first encounter was cautious. The scout did not attack, did not demand resources, and did not communicate in a way that could be considered threatening. Yet its presence alone caused unease. Council representatives debated how to respond. Some argued for immediate engagement, fearing that humanity might be preparing for an aggressive move. Others urged caution, suggesting that observation and patience were wiser, as any rash action could provoke a conflict the Council might not be ready for. No decision came easily, and tensions ran high. Council members had never faced a species so unpredictable, so capable, and so clearly prepared to act on its own terms. Humans, meanwhile, operated with the calm confidence that had been developed over decades of isolation. The fleet had been tested, simulated, and trained for every conceivable scenario. Crews were disciplined, intelligent, and prepared to adapt to the unexpected. They understood the importance of subtlety and patience. The first mission was not about confrontation. It was about observation, demonstrating capabilities without provoking unnecessary fear. The human scout moved through Council-controlled space, collecting information, mapping territories, and assessing potential threats, all without being detected as anything more than an unusual anomaly. When Council scientists finally analyzed the vessel, they were stunned. Every system was a testament to human ingenuity. Energy generation was nearly limitless, shields were adaptive and self-repairing, and communication networks were decentralized and secure. The vessel's artificial intelligence could anticipate problems, suggest solutions, and make autonomous decisions that rivaled the cognitive abilities of Council strategists. It was clear that humans had not only caught up with the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, but in many ways, they had surpassed them. The Council began to realize that the species they had once dismissed as reckless was now a force to be reckoned with. Humanity's approach to first contact was deliberate and careful. They did not announce their presence with fanfare or threats. Instead, they demonstrated their capabilities gradually. Observatories picked up unmanned probes that appeared to study Council systems with precision and care. Small fleets of automated vessels performed tasks that showed humans could operate across vast distances with minimal support. Even when communication was attempted, it was subtle, polite, and measured. Humans understood the power of restraint, of demonstrating strength without provoking conflict. This strategy was entirely deliberate, reflecting the wisdom developed over centuries of planning, preparation, and isolation. The Council's reaction was mixed. Some members began to panic, realizing that their assumptions about humanity had been catastrophically wrong. Others were curious, intrigued by the technological and strategic advancements that humans had achieved. But most importantly, all Council members understood that the balance of power was shifting. A species they had considered young, unpredictable, and expendable was now capable of challenging established norms and technologies. It was a humbling revelation, one that forced the Council to reconsider every past decision regarding humanity. Humans, however, remained patient. They did not rush into diplomacy or confrontation. Instead, they focused on observation, learning, and preparation. Scout vessels quietly monitored Council fleets, studied patterns of movement, and identified potential vulnerabilities. Humans were gathering intelligence, not for attack, but to understand the environment they were re-entering. Every detail collected added to their advantage, ensuring that, when they eventually acted openly, They would do so with confidence, precision, and authority. The presence of humanity began to ripple through the galaxy in ways the Council could not control. Other civilizations detected anomalies and unusual activity, sparking speculation and curiosity. Rumors spread about the return of a species long thought isolated and weak. Some saw opportunity, hoping to ally with humans, while others feared competition or conflict. The Council, which had once dismissed humanity as inconsequential, found itself navigating uncertainty on an unprecedented scale. Their confidence, built over centuries, was being challenged by a species that had learned to thrive under pressure and adversity. Humanity's first contact also revealed their mastery of strategy and innovation. The scout vessel demonstrated not just technology, but foresight, coordination, and discipline. Humans had learned that power was not merely about strength, but about preparation, intelligence, and adaptability. They showed the galaxy that a species could achieve incredible things without relying on intimidation or aggression. Every movement of the scout fleet sent a message. Humans were no longer naive or reckless. They were deliberate, capable, and unafraid of challenges. Council leaders were forced to reassess their perception of humans. The species they had once feared as unpredictable had become disciplined, strategic, and technologically advanced. It was clear that any attempt to underestimate humanity would be a grave mistake. Observers began to realize that the decades of banishment had not weakened humans. It had refined them. Isolation had been a crucible, shaping humans into a civilization that was innovative, self-reliant, and capable of operating at levels unmatched by most other species. The first human scout returned with detailed knowledge, demonstrating that the missions were not only possible, but highly successful. The Council could no longer ignore the reality of humanity's capabilities. Every analysis reinforced the same conclusion. Humans had grown stronger, smarter, and more prepared than anyone had expected. The perception of humanity as a reckless, immature species was shattered. What the Council had once dismissed as a minor threat was now a formidable presence in the galaxy. Humans were careful, however, to avoid arrogance or unnecessary provocation. Their goal was not to dominate immediately, but to establish a presence, build credibility, and demonstrate that they had returned on their own terms. They communicated selectively, showing respect where it was due and restraint where caution was necessary. This approach won subtle respect, even among those who had been critical of humanity in the past. It became clear that humans had mastered the balance between power and diplomacy, understanding that influence often depended more on perception and strategy than on raw strength alone. As the first contact period continued, humans began to quietly expand their reach. Additional scout ships and automated systems followed, mapping territories, monitoring Council fleets, and learning the patterns of galactic politics. They acted with precision, never revealing the full scope of their fleet and never provoking conflict. Humanity had become a shadow presence, an unseen but undeniable force. The Council, which had once assumed dominance over this species, now faced uncertainty and concern. They could see the results of centuries of human ingenuity, and it left them anxious, curious, and increasingly respectful. By the end of the initial contact phase, it was evident that humanity had returned to the galaxy in a way no one had predicted. They were not a species begging for acceptance or protection. They were a species prepared, disciplined, and strategic, demonstrating capabilities far beyond what the Council had anticipated. The first encounter had not only shocked the galaxy technologically, but it had also transformed perceptions. Humans were no longer outsiders. They were a presence to be respected, studied, and carefully considered in every future decision. The story of humanity's first contact was one of subtle mastery, patience, and precision. The Council had assumed weakness, but humans had transformed adversity into power. The scout vessels, the intelligence gathering, and the strategic restraint all demonstrated that humanity had learned to operate not just as individuals, but as a unified, disciplined civilization capable of shaping its own destiny. The galaxy, which had once dismissed them, now had to acknowledge that humans had returned, and they had returned stronger than ever. Humans had proven a simple but profound truth. Isolation had not diminished them. It had refined them. The species that the Council had banished was no longer naive or reckless. The Galactic Council had never faced a situation like this. For centuries, they had assumed control over the galaxy, confident in their alliances, technology, and collective wisdom. They had seen countless species rise and fall, but humanity was different. They had been young, unpredictable, and reckless, yes, but never powerful. At least that was the Council's belief. That assumption had been shattered. The first human contacts were subtle, quiet, and controlled, yet the implications were undeniable. Humans had not only survived isolation, but had transformed themselves into a force the Council had never imagined. Panic began to spread among the member civilizations, first quietly, then openly. As leaders realized the enormity of the situation, council chambers, once orderly and full of confident debate, erupted in chaos. Representatives argued over what humanity's presence truly meant. Some insisted that the humans were no longer just explorers. They were a fully capable, self-sufficient civilization with technology that rivaled the Council's best. Others feared that the humans might have built weapons and strategies that could threaten entire systems if provoked. Every analysis, every report, only heightened the sense of urgency. Panic was growing, fueled by the knowledge that the Council had misjudged humanity, and that misjudgment could no longer be ignored. The Council's first mistake was assuming they could control the narrative. Orders were sent to monitor humans more closely, to intercept their vessels, and to gather intelligence. But humans had anticipated this. Their scouts and hidden fleets operated with precision and stealth. No Council patrol had yet encountered a full-scale human fleet, and attempts to detect or interfere with human operations were largely unsuccessful. The Council realized, with growing alarm, that humans were operating on a level of coordination and technological sophistication that made interception nearly impossible. Every failed attempt only deepened the sense of unease. Council leaders now faced a harsh reality. Humanity was not only capable, but also unpredictable. They had survived decades in isolation, building technology, training crews, and preparing for a future the Council could not imagine. Their sudden emergence demonstrated not just skill, but vision, patience, and discipline. For the first time, the Council had to confront the idea that a species they had considered subordinate could outmaneuver and outthink them. The panic was compounded by the knowledge that humans had been observing the Council quietly, learning patterns and gaining intelligence. They were no longer inexperienced outsiders. They were strategists with the advantage of secrecy and preparation. The panic was not limited to the Council's leadership. Across the galaxy, member civilizations began to feel the ripple effects. Traders, diplomats, and scientists noticed unusual activity near Council-controlled space. Whispers spread about a species long thought isolated, now operating with precision and strength. The uncertainty created fear. Civilizations that had previously relied on the Council's guidance began to question their own security. Alliances wavered as no one could predict what humanity's next move might be. The Council, which had prided itself on stability and order, was suddenly confronted with a problem that no protocol or strategy could easily resolve. Emergency sessions were convened, with debates lasting for days. Some representatives argued for negotiation, hoping to welcome humanity back under controlled terms. Others insisted on a show of force, fearing that any delay could allow humans to grow stronger or gain advantages. Voices clashed over moral responsibility security, and the potential consequences of each action. But the one thing all members agreed on was that humanity could no longer be ignored. The Council had assumed they were dealing with a weak, isolated species. Now, every member understood the terrifying truth. Humans had grown powerful, disciplined, and resourceful, and they were acting on their own schedule. Humans, of course, were aware of the Council's growing panic. They had spent centuries preparing for this moment, training crews, perfecting technology, and building fleets that could operate independently across vast distances. But their goal was not to provoke fear unnecessarily. They acted with calculated restraint, demonstrating capability without aggression. Scout ships observed, gathered intelligence, and tested systems, all while avoiding direct conflict. Humans understood that power was most effective when combined with strategy and patience. They were not simply showing strength, they were demonstrating mastery. And the Council's reaction only confirmed how effective their preparation had been as the Council struggled with panic. Human fleets quietly expanded their presence. Automated vessels patrolled key systems, mapping resources and analyzing vulnerabilities. Scout ships moved through critical trade routes, studying fleet movements and communication patterns. Humans gathered intelligence, but not for destruction, at least not yet. They were preparing to re-enter the galaxy on their own terms, ensuring that they had knowledge, strategy, and readiness before any open engagement. This careful approach only heightened the Council's fear. They could see humans' capabilities, but they could not predict what would happen next. Council diplomats realized that negotiation might be necessary, but they lacked leverage. Humans were not desperate, they were not seeking approval, and they were clearly operating from a position of strength. Every Council attempt to initiate dialogue was met with calm, measured responses that emphasized human independence. The subtle message was clear. Humanity was no longer a species to be controlled or dismissed. They had grown, adapted, and prepared in ways the Council had failed to anticipate. The panic intensified as leaders realized that any misstep could have serious consequences. The psychological impact on the Council was profound. Confidence, once a defining trait of the organization, gave way to fear and uncertainty. The leaders who had once debated humanity's threat with casual confidence now faced sleepless nights, analyzing reports of scout ships, hidden fleets, and unexpected technological advances. They could no longer rely on assumptions. They had to reconsider every previous interaction with humans, every policy, and every dismissal. Panic was not just about the present, it was about the decades of misjudgment and the realization that humans had been underestimated for far too long. Council military strategists worked frantically to adapt. They ran simulations, studied human tactics, and attempted to predict the potential scale of human capability. Yet every model revealed the same unsettling conclusion. Humans were not just capable, they were adaptable, strategic, and prepared. Their fleets could operate independently, respond quickly to threats, and make decisions with a level of precision that even the Council's most advanced ships struggled to match. Each simulation only reinforced the urgency of the situation, heightening panic and uncertainty among the Council members. The wider galaxy began to take notice as well. Civilizations that had once relied on the Council's authority saw the first signs of human activity and began to reconsider their own positions. Some sought alliances with humans, hoping to benefit from their technological advancements and strategic insights. Others prepared for possible conflict, reinforcing fleets and defenses. The panic that had begun in Council chambers now extended across multiple star systems. The balance of power in the galaxy, once assumed stable, was suddenly in question. Amid the panic, humans maintained patience and discipline. They understood that the Council's fear was evidence of their own effectiveness. Their fleets remained hidden, their moves deliberate, and their communications precise. Humans had learned over decades of isolation that rushing or showing aggression too soon could backfire. They had prepared for this moment not just to demonstrate power, but to establish a foundation of respect and credibility. Every action, every maneuver, reinforced the truth. Humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. By the end of this period, the Galactic Council faced an uncomfortable reality. Humans were no longer just survivors of banishment. They were innovators, strategists, and masters of preparation. The species they had once dismissed as reckless and unpredictable had grown into a force that could not be ignored. Panic had shifted from mere fear to a recognition that humanity's return would reshape the galaxy's future. The Council had been forced to confront the consequences of their misjudgment. And the lesson was clear. Humanity was not only back, but it was stronger, wiser, and more prepared than anyone could have imagined. The story of the Council's panic is a story of miscalculation, underestimation, and eventual recognition. They had assumed humanity was weak, but humans had proven the opposite. They had survived isolation, innovated technologies, trained fleets, and prepared strategies far beyond the Council's expectations. Panic was not just a reaction to what humans had achieved. It was a realization that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and that humans would play a defining role in shaping the future. Through all of this, humans remained disciplined. They were aware of the Council's panic, but they did not act out of arrogance or malice. They acted with purpose, patience, and strategy. The hidden fleets, the scouts, and the intelligence systems were all part of a long-term plan to reclaim a presence in the galaxy on their own terms. Humans had learned that power was most effective when combined with foresight, preparation, and careful action. After decades of preparation, patience, and quiet observation, humanity was ready for its full return to the galaxy. The hidden fleets that had been built in secret, the technologies that had been developed in isolation, and the generations of humans trained for this moment were now ready to step forward. The Galactic Council and other civilizations had already felt the ripple of humans, returned through scouting vessels and subtle maneuvers, and panic had spread across the galaxy. But humanity was not here to conquer. They were here to engage on their own terms, to demonstrate that the species once banished had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable than anyone could have imagined. The first full fleet emerged like a silent wave at the edge of Council space. The ships were sleek, resilient, and precise, each one a product of decades of human ingenuity. Scouts, carriers, and observation vessels moved in coordinated patterns, demonstrating strategy and discipline. Humans had prepared for every possible scenario: defensive formations, rapid deployment, and autonomous operations. Their arrival was a quiet statement, not of aggression, but of mastery. Every ship, every crew member, reflected the lessons learned during isolation resilience, cooperation, and strategic thinking. Council representatives watched in disbelief as human fleets appeared in previously secure systems. It was no longer possible to dismiss humanity as weak or inexperienced. Every analysis revealed superior technology, adaptive strategies, and intelligence networks that the Council had not anticipated. Humans had not just survived isolation, they had grown beyond it. They could maneuver fleets silently, repair damaged systems quickly, and respond to threats without external assistance. The Council, which had once assumed control over the galaxy's young species, now faced a civilization that was equal in strategy, innovation, and discipline. Humans did not act recklessly. Despite their strength, they remained careful, demonstrating capability without unnecessary provocation. Communication channels opened selectively, allowing dialogue with Council representatives and other civilizations. Humans emphasized independence, intelligence, and the ability to operate without interference. They made it clear that they were not asking for permission or recognition. They had returned because they were ready. This approach was deliberate, showing that humans could act as equals in the galaxy while maintaining restraint and respect. The action taken by humanity was a demonstration of mastery. Scout vessels mapped trade routes, studied fleet movements, and collected intelligence. Observation stations, previously hidden, transmitted data about star systems and technological patterns. Humans had built systems that could operate autonomously, ensuring that their presence remained strategic and efficient. Even minor actions, like repositioning fleets or deploying automated sensors, communicated a message. Humans had grown beyond the Council's expectations, and their capabilities could not be ignored. The response from the Galactic Council was mixed. Some members advocated diplomacy, recognizing the need to engage humans respectfully. Others remained fearful, concerned about the technological and strategic advantages humans had gained. The Council's panic had evolved into a careful, anxious planning, but humans controlled the pace. They had learned from centuries of preparation that timing, patience, and strategic restraint were more effective than aggression. Their measured actions forced the Council to reconsider policies and reassess humanity's potential impact on the galaxy. Humanity's return also inspired other civilizations. Some saw the humans' discipline, innovation, and strategic foresight as a model to learn from. Traders, explorers, and scientists from distant star systems reached out cautiously, eager to engage with humans while respecting their independence. This selective collaboration allowed humans to form alliances where mutual benefit existed, without compromising their autonomy. Humans had learned that influence came not from domination, but from competence, integrity, and careful planning. They demonstrated that a species could command respect by being prepared, capable, and strategic rather than aggressive. Despite their growing influence, humans remained grounded. They understood that power without wisdom could lead to conflict or instability. Crews were trained not just in technology or strategy, but in diplomacy, ethics, and cooperation. Decisions were made collectively, reflecting the values that had developed during isolation: unity, adaptability, and resilience. Humanity's leadership style emphasized collaboration and long-term thinking. They did not seek to control the galaxy. They sought to participate as equals, proving that discipline, preparation, and intelligence could achieve what brute force never could. The technological advances developed during isolation now had a profound impact on the galaxy. Humans introduced energy systems that were self-sufficient, fleets that could operate independently, and artificial intelligence capable of learning and adapting. These systems were shared selectively, allowing civilizations to benefit while respecting human autonomy. Human science and engineering became benchmarks for innovation. Their technologies were not just tools of power. They were demonstrations of ingenuity, resilience, and the ability to turn challenges into opportunities. The galaxy, which had once dismissed humanity, now studied it with respect, curiosity, and cautious admiration. The return of humanity also shifted cultural perspectives. For generations, humans had grown up with the understanding that they were isolated, underestimated, and banished. Now, they were leaders in strategy, technology, and diplomacy. Art, literature, and music reflected this transformation, celebrating resilience, ingenuity, and the capacity to rise stronger after adversity. Education emphasized creativity, problem-solving, and collaboration, showing that humans could thrive under any circumstance. Their story became a source of inspiration, not just within their species, but across civilizations. Observing from afar, humans had learned that reputation mattered as much as capability. They maintained discipline in interactions, communicated respectfully, and demonstrated competence consistently. This approach built trust, even among those who had once feared them. Other civilizations began to rely on human insights for planning, problem-solving, and technological development. Humans were no longer outsiders. They were valued contributors, respected for their ability to innovate, solve complex problems, and act with wisdom. The species that had been banished was now essential to the galaxy's functioning. Even the Galactic Council, once the primary authority in the galaxy, had to acknowledge humanity's influence. Panic had evolved into cautious respect, and eventually into collaboration. Humans participated in negotiations, shared knowledge selectively, and demonstrated that their strength could be applied constructively. The Council realized that the centuries of banishment had inadvertently created a species capable of teaching the galaxy lessons in discipline, preparation, and innovation. Humanity's return was not an act of revenge. It was a demonstration of what was possible when a species persevered. Adapted and planned carefully by the time humans had fully integrated into galactic affairs. Their presence was transformative. Trade networks became more efficient thanks to human-designed systems. Scientific collaboration accelerated as humans shared innovations selectively. Diplomacy shifted toward merit-based respect, emphasizing capability and preparation rather than history or influence. Humans had returned stronger than ever, but they had done so without arrogance or unnecessary aggression. Their approach set a standard for how civilizations could engage, respectfully while asserting independence and competence. Humanity's story became a legend across the galaxy. They were no longer the species that had been banished. They were symbols of resilience, innovation, and strategic thinking. Every fleet, every technological achievement, and every diplomatic engagement reflected centuries of preparation, discipline, and vision. Other civilizations studied humans not with fear, but with admiration and curiosity. They saw what was possible when adversity was met with creativity, patience, and unity. The lesson was clear. Isolation had not weakened humans. It had forged them into a civilization capable of thriving anywhere, under any circumstances. Even after the initial integration, humans continued to innovate and adapt. They established research stations, trade networks, and training programs that shared knowledge selectively while preserving autonomy. Their fleets remained prepared, their crews disciplined, and their technologies continually improved. Humanity understood that the galaxy was dynamic and that maintaining influence required constant learning and adaptation. They approached every new challenge with the same patience and strategic foresight that had guided them through centuries of isolation. The ultimate triumph of humanity was not in conquest, but in respect, influence, and capability. They had returned to the galaxy not as a species begging for acceptance, but as equals, valued for their ingenuity, discipline, and strategic thinking. They demonstrated that power is most effective when combined with patience, preparation, and ethical consideration. Humans had turned banishment into opportunity, isolation into mastery, and adversity into achievement. Their presence reshaped the galaxy, not through fear, but through excellence, vision, and the unyielding spirit of a species that refused to be defined by limitations. By the end of their return, humanity